Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. I'm Mithali Mukherjee. In a few days from today, the Finance Minister will rise to present the Union Budget for India. What's generally been seen as merely a statement of accounts kind of process, and of course a media circus for the other channels, the business channels, this time round the budget takes on immense significance, perhaps more so than it has in recent history. But what's the key things to watch out for, and what will make this a genuinely breakthrough budget versus a bit of a disappointment or a large disappointment? Hopefully not. Let me walk you through the 7 things I think will be crucial in the Finance Minister's speech and the things to watch out for. Number 1, the fiscal deficit. I'm sure you've seen that splashed across many pink papers and general newspapers as well. The figures for this year are likely to be high, given the kind of cave through we had in economic activity and the fact that business is only slowly beginning to resume now. So that figure ranges anywhere between 6.5% to 7%, but the more important figure will be what the Finance Minister guides to going ahead. Most economists and brokerages and think tanks are circling around the 5 to 5.5% mark. Mind you, we're talking about the fiscal deficit, so the gap between 5 and 5.5% is actually quite wide. But the reason it's important is because it will be a good and important indicator on whether the Finance Minister is actually doubling down on impetus to growth, or she's cautious about what this figure might look like and what rating agencies globally might make of it. In a recent interview, of course, she herself said that she's not going to let the fiscal deficit number bother her too much, quote unquote. But this is one number that I think generally economy watchers, stock markets, everyone will be looking at quite carefully. The other one, more importantly for me actually, is her spending figure. There are very clear lines of support that are required at this point. Not just health per se, but I think the kind of money that is now allocated to the vaccine rollout, time is of essence. We've crossed that 2 million mark, but really we have a long way to go in terms of ensuring vaccination for all. So I think the kind of spend that is allocated on that front. Infrastructure, which is something we heard a lot about last year, but unfortunately didn't see too much by way of follow through the year, will be the other big one. What does the government intend to spend? And remember, at this point, I would say much of the onus on pushing growth and really giving it, a few steps forward is on the shoulders of the government. So what does it intend to spend in terms of building roads, infrastructure, bridges, etc.? There is a dual impact on this. It's not just what's being built, it's the number of people that can be then pushed into some kind of employment, which is a serious crisis for India at this point. So I think what she's spending on will be important. Aside from that, the spend on some of these direct transfer schemes where money is going directly into the pockets of those who need it the most, whether it is via the PM Kisan scheme or the direct benefit transfers. Most recently, the data from Oxfam was stunning but not surprising. 35% growth for the billionaires of India in terms of their wealth, even as the poor got poorer. It is important to put in some kind of liquid money, some cash into the hands of those who are literally living a hand-to-mouth existence, where there is not enough to save clearly, but now it seems like there is not enough to subsist on either. So I think that kind of spending will be very important. And the government has been quite tight-fisted in terms of its fiscal spend through the year, promising that it will do it when it's needed the most. The time is now, and I hope we see that kind of spending come through. There's been another miss of sorts in terms of the targets the Finance Minister has been putting out, and that's her taxation targets. Remember, GST revenues are now beginning to pick up, but there has been plenty of criticism about the form, structure, implementation, everything with the GST. This is not a subject she can take on directly in the budget itself, because that would go to the GST panel. But it would be interesting to see whether she has any statement of intent at relooking this entire GST structure and what she's going to do in terms of tax revenues from there. The other one that I hope the Finance Minister addresses is the indirect taxes and the immense pressure it's been putting on the pockets of ordinary citizens in terms of fuel price hikes. There seems to be no justification that indirect taxes are so high via the center or the state on petrol and diesel in an environment where food inflation and inflation generally has been trending quite high, things are getting more expensive, as also the fact that the economy is now very slowly trying to make an attempt to get back to normal, to clamp down on fuel costs at this point with such high indirect taxes makes very little sense, and I hope that is redacted or is at least minimized in some way. So that's the other one to watch out for. Again, there's what she gets in terms of taxes and what kind of tax changes she announces. There's a few cesses that exist at this point. The Swachh Bharat cess, the Krishi Kalyan cess. It's possible that that may be shifted onto a COVID cess or even a defense cess. There's been a lot of chatter about that. There has been talk about a wealth tax being introduced as well. Of course, many of India Inc. have been, fighting back on that, saying it's not a very great contribution in terms of total tax receipts. But there has been talk of introducing some kind of wealth tax, and there's been some chatter around, retweaking the tax cuts for the base slabs. So basically, the 2,50,000 to 5 lakh, the 5 lakh to 7,50,000. One is at 5% currently, and the other is at 10%. Could she do a relook over there? I don't know. It seems unlikely given the fact that the revenue she's getting are on very, very thin ice at this point. But that's the expectations around taxes. This is the big one. Unemployment. What does the finance minister have to say about it, and how does she plan to tackle it? There are two tracks now that unemployment will have to be attacked on. One is to continue pumping in money and perhaps allocate greater money in terms of helping with rural unemployment. And that, of course, is via the Narega scheme. There has been tremendous appetite for Narega this year round. Remember, a lot of people or a lot of migrant laborers made that journey back home, an arduous journey, and they had to begin their hunt for work again, which came through the hands of Narega. So will she increase her spend of Narega? Equally, what has happened post-COVID is this situation or this trend of urban unemployment. There has been talk among some economists that perhaps this is a good time to create some kind of social welfare scheme, some kind of urban employment guarantee scheme. But I must caution that many who have been, handling government and governance have warned that this is not easy to execute. So I'm not sure if this one will come through. I will underline, though, that unemployment remains the most critical issue that should be resolved, whether in the budget or in the months ahead. The recent data from International Labour Organization showed that worldwide, the job loss thanks to the pandemic has been 4 times that what we saw in 2009, which is when the global financial crisis happened. So it's not just a local issue, it's a global issue for sure. Our own numbers do not look good. The recent numbers from CMIE showed that the December unemployment data actually came in at 9.1%. Mind you, this is the highest since the beginning of India's economic recovery happened since that lockdown in June. So big one for me, unemployment and what comes through on that. Defense. Spend has been slipping on defense. Most military strategists have been pushing for the fact that defense spending should be somewhere close to 3% of GDP in terms of allocation. That's not been the case. As we stand and as things stand at this point, India is looking at 2 active borders. Of course, there is the situation on the Indo-Pak border, but now there is a building situation in the face-off against China as well. So that has meant through the year, more boots on the ground, more machinery. I think it would be important for the finance minister to speak not just about spending for defense, but generally what kind of strategy will be approached now in order to make sure that the muscle of the armed forces is increased to take on an adversary as large as China. So defense is the other one that I would watch out for. On the 7th point, I would just say that I think what's important for this budget and generally what has happened on economic terms or economic data is a lack of transparency and a lack of trust. There has been too much by way of numbers looking this way and then being restated, numbers being challenged on whether or not they are authentic. Transparency on data, we still don't have any data in terms of what the government has collated on employment figures. We need to see that. We need to see transparency on what the fiscal deficit looks like. I think for me, it would be important for the finance minister to stand up and say, hey, here's what we have, a pandemic. It's a never before seen situation. Here's what we're going to do on the fiscal deficit. Let's abandon this. Let's look at growth for now. Let's set out a new glide path in terms of what India wants to do on the fisc or otherwise. So transparency, I think, would be a very welcome move. And the budget is a great place to start with that. And the other one, I think, and I hope the finance minister should be mindful of, is that this pandemic-induced recession is very different from anything any of us have seen before. It has been so unequal in the kind of impact it's had. So here you have a section of India's population, the wealthier ones, who have been largely unaffected, and life has actually carried on just as it was before. And then you have another complete and large swath that has been rendered completely lifeless. Jobs have been lost, shutters have been downed on small businesses. I think the finance minister should realize and be mindful of the fact that even though the economy is recovering, there is a lot of damage that has happened at the lower surface, and we must do everything that is in our hands to prevent that from being a permanent scar for us. Of course, one will know only on Monday what the details are, but here's the quick expectations on what to watch out for on the budget.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.